A golden afternoon of late sunshine lay warm and drowsy upon the hidden land between. In the midst of it, there wound lazily a dark river of brown water, bordered with ancient willows, arched over with willows, blocked with fallen willows, and flecked with thousands of faded willow branches. The air was thick with them, fluttering yellow from the branches, for there was a warm and gentle breeze blowing softly in the valley, and the reeds were rustling, and the willow boughs were creaking.
Welcome to the Wayward Wizards podcast. Today we're reading Chapter 6 of Book 1 of the Fellowship of the Ring, The Old Forest. My name is Logan.
And I am Zach.
So other than all the willow happenings going on in the chapter this week, what happened this week, Zach?
There has to be
Are there any willows in this?
Some world record for the number of times willow has been used in a sentence.
In a single sentence, yeah.
Willows on willows on willows on willows. In the house of Tom Bombadillos.
No.
Yeah, I know. Cut that out, please. All right. So this is a weird chapter, Logan.
Yeah, I think it's very strange. The whole first book is extremely weird. I mean,
just the tone is all over the place. I mean, this is like we are reading a different book than like chapter 1 and 2.
Yes.
Shadow of the Past and this chapter are like they're worlds different. This is like creepy and weird.
They're like barely
kind of like
related to each other. Yeah.
Yeah.
Really
I mean, this
weird.
is like reading like a Tim Burton movie.
That's a perfect way to sort of like visualize it, I think.
Or like a Pan's Labyrinth, like Guillermo del Toro kind of like
absolutely
tone.
Perfect.
Like,
yes.
You know, it's creepy, it's dense, it's weird, it's scary in some points. I mean, it kind of speaks to I don't know, I think all of us have had the experience of being lost as children.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like that sense of like kind of creeping panic of like, oh, okay, where are my mom and dad? Or like, you know, where's the group that I'm supposed to be with? And then you're fine at first, but then you start to get increasingly more and more panicked. And then before the end, it's like, you know, everything just closes around you and you have a real honest to God freak out.
Yes.
But you know, they're moving through this old forest. There's this sense that the forest is alive and antagonistic towards hobbits.
Yeah.
And it feels like the forest is like kind of like closing in on them. There are paths, but the paths change. They're trying to get to one point, but the forest is kind of like willingly leading them to another point. It's all just very, very strange. And we get introduced to probably the most controversial character in all of Lord of the Rings, Tom Bombadil. Some people love him. Some people hate him. Nobody knows who he is. And anybody who says that they know exactly who he is probably wrong. He is not God. Before anybody writes us an email saying they think he is not God. All right.
I think he's Jesus.
He's not God. He's not Jesus. He's not Gandalf in disguise. He's not any of these things. Like he's his own thing. But yeah, I'm sure we'll talk all about that.
All my theories are just gone into the wastebasket now.
But yeah, let's kind of work our way through it. So Frodo wakes up from his creepy dream from chapter 5.
Yes. I like how the chapters like spill into each other.
Yeah.
Here, you know?
Like when you wake up from a dream, right?
Yeah.
Like
it's really cool.
The dream world and the real world are still kind of blended.
Yeah. I love that.
You know, the dream ended with thunder and lightning. And this chapter picks up with Mary banging on the door and holding a candle. Yeah. So that's clearly like what is bleeding. The dream is bleeding into reality.
Yep.
And he says, it's 4:30. Get up, you sluggard. Everybody's awake, even Pippin.
Well, and then they insult Fatty.
Again.
Wake that sluggard. Fatty. Fatty Bulger was still yawning. I love it.
Poor Fredegar, man. People
That would be
Gets
me.
no respect.
That would definitely be me. I mean, just like dragging my butt out of bed.
Oh man. I mean, I think on this reading, I've always said that I connect to the character of Sam more
Yeah,
than any other character, but no, it's Fatty Bulger.
it's Fatty. Fatty for life.
Fatty, we're down we're down with Fatty. Um, but yeah, also like Fatty's just so freaking sweet.
He's a good
Like
dude.
like not only is he like set himself up to be the fall guy, like he's the decoy for whoever's going to come and kill Frodo. He's going to wear his clothes so that he gets killed instead. He's like, I don't care if I get killed as long as I get to stay home. That's, I mean,
Yeah.
how relatable is that?
Just don't make me go into the old forest. I'm cool.
Just don't make me leave my hometown. Like
Yeah.
I'll die. Just don't make me leave my hometown.
I know all the best restaurants around here, you know, like
That's
I
right.
don't want to go somewhere new.
Just let me die. But yeah, they load up their ponies. They're sturdy little beasts of the kind loved by hobbits, not speedy, but good for a long day's work.
Yeah.
And they load up and they start going to the old forest, and uh they come to the hedge, capital H hedge, which is like this impenetrable mire of branches. And Frediger is like, how are you going to get through this? And Mary's like, oh, don't worry about it. We got our own little entrance. And they make their way over. And Fatty is like, goodbye, Frodo. I wish you were not going into the forest. I only hope you will not need rescuing before the day is out. But good luck to you today and every day.
So
And those
sweet.
are his last words in the story. But yeah, I mean, and he's right. They are going to need rescuing by the end of the day.
Indeed.
That's a little bit of a fortuitous.
Little foreshadowing there, yeah. So they go through this tunnel. Mary gets down and unlocks the gate. It's funny, I don't think of the hobbits like carrying keys.
Oh yeah,
But he's got something to unlock the gate. Yeah, it shuts behind them, and he says, "There," said Mary, "you have left the Shire, and you are now outside and on the edge of the old forest." So this is their first step outside of the Shire in the
yeah.
story, and
That's right.
it only took 100 some odd pages, and
Yeah, that's right.
and then we start to sort of understand like what is the old forest. Mary talks about the trees disliking strangers, and
Yeah.
maybe dropping a branch on on somebody here or there.
Usually they're content just to do that, but there's a sense
Yeah,
that if they wanted to,
they could do
they could
worse.
do way
Right,
worse.
right.
Um, yeah, and we get this like great little bit of Hobbit lore, which was completely lost on me especially as a kid reading this story.
Me too.
Uh,
Yeah,
but there's this kind of idea that the hobbits have built this hedge around the forest, and that the trees have kind of like uh encroached on the hedge, and so there was a great big like tree chopping down party, and they made a bonfire they call the bonfire glade, and that the forest is still really mad at the hobbits about this,
yeah.
and that kind of like explains the enmity between the forest and the hobbits. I'm just going to read this little selection here because it's a little bit of a convoluted plot piece. I want to make sure I get it right. It says, they do say the trees do actually move and can surround strangers and hem them in. In fact, long ago they attacked the hedge. They came and planted themselves right by it and leaned over it. But the hobbits came and cut down hundreds of trees and made a great bonfire in the forest and burned all the ground in a long strip east of the hedge. After that, the trees gave up the attack, but they became very unfriendly. There is still a wide bare space not far inside where the bonfire was made. And so they call this like the bonfire glade. And the hobbits make their way to it eventually. But I think that, I don't know, it's an interesting, subtle thing that Tolkien is doing here. But there seems to be kind of like this deeper morality tale about the way that human beings have encroached on nature,
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that nature takes notice of that and finds ways to push back. It seems to be like this morality tale about industrialization or of an attempt to control the
Yeah.
natural world.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that we're told that there's no undergrowth in the forest. So this is a
Mm,
really thick old growth forest where there's not enough sunlight on the ground because the canopy
mm,
is so thick. And when you go into really old forests like that, it's pretty easy to walk through a forest that's at least a hardwood forest like in a northern clime like England or
mm,
parts of North America, where you can kind
mm,
of walk through and there's not a lot of brambles or big hedges you have to get through or anything like that. And then when they get to the bonfire glade, it's like choked with thorns and stuff. Like it's difficult to kind of like
hemlock shoots and
get around.
grasses, and
Yeah, get around, and it's not like it doesn't feel like a healthy place, you know.
yeah,
And
yeah,
I mean, the old forest is scary, but there's like some kind of wholeness or something to it, right? Whereas like
mm-hmm,
this bonfire glade has been cleared out, and then all this like undergrowth has been allowed to grow. So there's
yeah,
something there where Tolkien's kind of saying like, unless we, I mean, I would assume that Tolkien would sort of see human beings as like stewards of nature,
yeah,
and
yeah,
so it's not that we don't have some kind of role in shaping or using nature for our own benefit, but that it has to be done in a way that's sort of responsible. There's like a fiduciary responsibility to nature where
mm-hmm,
we're supposed to take care in a way that flows together with nature, which I think is why ecologists, in the 60s and 70s, like kind of took this book as an anthem in some ways. But I love how complicated that is. And you were talking about how strange this chapter is, and I just feel like there's something in every paragraph that we could spend an hour talking about,
yeah,
which is why
yeah.
it's so strange, because there's so many questions that come up about what's going on and why and what is Tolkien trying to say in this odd foray through the forest. So
And it reminds me in so many ways of the story of the dwarves going through Mirkwood Forest and the Hobbit.
yeah, definitely.
There's a mystery about the forest. I think in old stories in the world before we had everything mapped, forests were kind of this murky place of the unknown, and there was kind of a sense that that's where like spirits and elves lived and fairies lived in the forest, and it was a place where you might come across a troll or something undesirable. But I mean, I think that probably speaks to kind of this primal fear of just like not being able to see everything around you, the
Yeah.
idea that there's something kind of lurking in the forest. But you know I don't know if you live like in a medieval village, and the village was cleared and there was a place for where everybody lived, but then the forest would be this unknown, scary,
Right.
like horrendous place, and you definitely get this like sense of foreboding
Mhm.
around the forest. I mean, the other obvious parallel between this and the Mirkwood section of the Hobbit is the forest being a place of like sleepiness, like enchantment. Kind of famously, Bomber falls into the river that they're not supposed to touch, this enchanted river,
Mhm.
and falls asleep, and they can't wake him up. Um, Lots of parallels between Bomber and Fatty Bulger, actually. Lots of
Oh, yeah, that's
good
interesting.
old good Tolkien fat jokes there. So I don't know. There's lots of symmetry between this and the Mirkwood chapter.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, they're becoming like kind of increasingly unsettled. They don't really know where they are. Merry's clearly the leader.
Yeah.
He has the most experience in the old forest, but even he is just kind of like, I don't know where we are, but we'll figure it out. We'll
Hmm.
get there eventually. But there's this great section where Pippin like cries out, and he's like, "Oi, oi! I'm not gonna do anything."
He's like overcome by fear or anxiety or something.
Yeah, it's on page 111 in my edition, but it says the feeling steadily grew until they found themselves looking up quickly or glancing back over their shoulders as if they expected a sudden blow. Pippin suddenly felt that he could not bear it any longer, and without warning let out a shout. Oi, oi! I'm not going to do anything. Just let me pass through, will you?
Yeah, there's like a presence or something that they can feel. That's pretty overwhelming.
They're being like watched. They're being kind of haunted by the forest. And Merry tells him like, hey, that's not going to help you out. Like, it does more harm than good. And
Yeah.
they seem to move in silence the rest of the way until Frodo tries to break some of the tension by singing a song.
Yeah. Uh, he says, I'll just read it.
Yeah, please.
O wanderers in the shadowed land, despair not, for though dark they stand, all woods there be must end at last, and see the open sun go past, the setting sun, the rising sun, the day's end or the day's begun. For east or west all woods must fail. And then on the word fail, his voice faded into silence. Just behind them, a large branch fell from an old, overhanging tree with a crash into the path. The trees seemed to close in before them. There's a weird tension between the sort of like agency and activity of the forest, and clearly something is happening.
Yeah.
But it's always a seeming quality. They don't see trees shift, right?
Yeah.
They always have they come to a place and it seems like they're being directed.
Right.
And that's spookier, I think, than like the trees suddenly moving or
Yeah,
marching.
it's not like the Ents that we're going to get later.
Right.
They don't see them marching along, but there's the sense that you look away and then you look back and the tree is not quite in the same spot that it was before.
Yeah, that's spooky. And we do get something similar after the Battle of Helm's Deep. Like suddenly there's just a forest.
Oh yeah, the Huorn.
We don't see those trees move, but like suddenly there's just a forest, and the orcs run in there and all die. Like, and so this forest is doing something, but we don't exactly get a like clear look at it. You can only see it out of the corner of your eye, and that's a spooky thing, I think.
Yeah, and I think it's it's spooky because we don't tend to think of trees as living things.
Yeah, that's
Like
interesting.
we may intellectually know that a tree is alive, but we tend to think of trees as a utility, like whether it's for wood or fuel, wood for building our houses,
Even shade, yeah.
Shade, yeah, like fruit producing trees,
Right.
like we tend to think of them as utilities, not. But if someone is like treating you as someone who's like inanimate or not alive, and then you respond by like kind of like establishing your own agency, I think that would be pretty creepy to the person who doesn't think of you as being alive. So yeah, I mean, I think there's a tendency to think of this as like, oh, this is like a haunted forest. It's like, no, it's actually just like a forest that knows it's alive.
Yeah.
And doesn't like all this talking of like, ending and
felling and ending and fire and all the things that that a tree is not. Those are all ways of approaching a tree as a means to an end rather than as an end in itself. And any living being that has a sense of its own existence is going to buck against that.
Right. They're going to fight against someone trying to exert their will
right
on it. But yeah, they're silently now moving their way through this forest that feels like increasingly more and more like it's controlling, where they go. Mary points his hand and says, "That is the line of the Withywindle. It comes out of the downs and flows southwest through the midst of the forest to join the Brandywine below Haysend. We don't want to go that way. The Withywindle Valley is said to be the queerest part of the whole wood, the center from which all the queerness comes, as it were." So that's that's where old Tom Bombadil lives. We don't know that yet.
Yeah.
But it seems like they're like, okay, whatever we do, we need to stay clear of the Withywindle.
Right.
And that's exactly where they end up going. It's like all paths lead to the Withywindle, whether you want it to or not. You're going to end up in that section of the forest.
They want to be going north, and they're constantly sort of veering off to the right. And he even says that at one point that it's always,
they were forced to the right and downwards, it says.
Yeah, the right and downwards, and there's these big rents in the earth that they have to go down into, and they're taking their ponies with them, and eventually they end up in one that they can't get out of at all once they're in it, and it becomes a stream, and then that stream becomes a creek, and then that creek becomes a stream, and then the stream meets up with a river.
Yeah, it says they were being headed off and were simply following a course chosen for them. eastwards and southwards, into the heart of the forest and not out of it. Yeah, and Mary is just kind of like, well, now I have at least some notion of where we are. We have come almost in the opposite direction which we intended. This is the River Windywindle. So it's kind of like, hey, now I know where we are. We're lost.
He tells us that, this is the River Windywindle after we get these two sentences where Tolkien uses the word willows. 1, 2, 3,
that's
4,
right. I skipped over that.
Five times in 2 sentences. But that's what we read for the opening of the podcast today. And I was curious if you had any insight into the word Withywindle.
Yeah, it's a weird one. So first of all, it's like a compound of 2 separate words, withy and windle. And Tolkien loves to do this, to like kind of like take kind of these lyrical words, these very old kind of like out of circulation words, and put them together to make these place names.
Mm-hmm.
But withy is related to the word willow. So a withy is like a willow branch.
Mm-hmm.
And it even has that kind of like lyrical sound to it, like withy, like you can almost like see it blowing in the wind, like a willow branch. Beautiful. And then a windle is like a tangle. It's like a spindle or a reel. So you can imagine something tightly wound. And so it's like, you can imagine the withy being this kind of like thin reed-like branch, and then a windle being like a spindle of branches. So it's like a miry net of branches that are almost impossible to get through. But a great word, very, very lyrical, withywindle. It kind of rolls off the tongue. It almost like has the sense of like a spider's web. It's like a trap or a net that you're being, kind of pulled towards, and you can get trapped in really easily.
Mm-hmm.
But they notice that there are tracks, and they're like the tracks, they change, and they're really subtle. And they're like, I wonder like who is this far out into the old forest to make these tracks anyway? And that's a little bit of foreshadowing of I think it's very clearly Tom Bombadil. He's making these tracks to the forest, right to the queerest part of the wood, which is his home.
I had an interesting to me. Maybe we want to cut this out, but Mary leads them to the path that he had discovered, because he goes ahead and discovers these tracks. Then he comes back.
He says, I'm going to go explore.
Yeah, and he's like, look, I found a path. The only thing for it is to follow this path. And when they get to the path, it says that, this is 113 in my edition, everywhere the reeds and grasses were lush and tall, in places far above their heads, but once found, the path was easy to follow, as it turned and twisted, picking out the sounder ground among the bogs and pools. So I realized as I was reading this that I think of myself as a hobbit in the story.
Yeah.
And I think of the hobbits as like my size, but of course they're not my size. They're
not. They're like half as tall. Yeah.
They're like 3 feet tall,
Yeah.
And I mean, my kids are taller than hobbits now at this point. Well, the majority of them are. And, and
there's a bunch of little squirts, man. There's a bunch of little squirts.
But these reeds are far above their heads. So I'm imagining reeds that are like 12 feet tall,
Yeah.
And so the scale, it just impressed me, like the scale. The forest also feels huge, but if you look at a map, a map of Middle Earth, it's like this itty bitty little dot on the map. And but for hobbits, everything is enormous.
Yeah.
And then I started thinking forward in the story, and I'm like, these hobbits walk from I mean,
across Europe.
And
they walk the length of North America.
And they're 3 feet tall, and like the scale just like started to overwhelm me as I was reading this. Just based on this just based on this description of these reeds, you know.
Yeah,
um
yeah.
and what a huge world they're walking out into. And when I put myself in the feet of the hobbits, and I think we're kind of supposed to take their point of view,
Oh,
um
absolutely,
it kind
absolutely.
of
Yeah.
it kind of really impresses the enormity of this story on me. And so I think the old forest is kind of like preparing us for like how big and scary the journey is, you know. But yeah, so they're trying to follow the path, and I think it sort of follows the river, and they start to feel hot. And we were talking about the sort of like somnolence or whatever of the forest. It kind of makes you
Mm,
sleepy.
yeah.
And there's flies all over the place, and
Yeah. He calls them
um,
armies of flies. Yeah.
yeah, armies of flies of all kinds buzzing around their ears. They're already starting to get sleepy.
Yeah. It says each step forward became more reluctant than the last.
Yeah, sleepiness seemed to be creeping out of the ground and up into their legs. Um, Tolkien, as somebody who knew what it was like to, be on the march, I think he must have thought that like the sleepiness is like coming out of the ground and trying to drag me down.
They're so sleepy that they just like sit down and uh start to doze off and make some like pretty bad decisions.
Extremely bad. Yeah.
Um, but there's something enchanted about it. You know, can't go another step without rest. Must have nap, says Mary.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like I need a T-shirt of that.
Must have nap. Yeah, for sure.
But Frodo's like, no, no, no. Like we can't. Like we got to get clear of this section. We don't have time to fall asleep. Like let's get going. But then he himself like sits down and he's like, oh, actually, like I need to bathe my feet in this water, and then he starts to fall asleep.
Only Sam sort of can keep it together.
Oh, he's the only one of them that's done an honest day's work. So maybe he is the only
Right.
one that's ever had to stay awake past 3 p.m.
Right.
when he got sleepy.
No naps for Sam. And he goes to take care of the ponies, and it sort of seems like the ponies have maybe been left behind or sort of strayed away from them, and so he goes
Yeah,
and
and that just shows like how their heads aren't in the right place. Like they're
yeah, they're not even taking care of one of their most valuable um, assets, which are these ponies.
yeah. I mean,
Um,
because like if a pony gets away from you, like good luck getting it back.
yeah, they don't like come when they're called, really. I mean,
No, I mean like they weigh a lot more than you, and you're not
yeah,
going to pull them. Like
right.
if you don't have that bridle in hand, like good luck trying to get an animal of that size to come with you if you let it go astray and it doesn't want to come back. But yeah, Sam, he recognizes that there's the word he uses is uncanny.
Mm-hmm.
There's more behind this than sun and warm air, he said. I don't like this great big tree. I don't trust it.
Right.
Hark, which means listen. Listen to it singing about sleep. This won't do it all. So there's this sense that there's a song in the air that is like enchanting them and like
Yeah,
almost like a lullaby.
and I wanted to make sure to note that Merry and Pippin, they drag themselves toward this tree. They look up at the gray and yellow leaves moving softly against the light and singing. So there's
Mm-hmm.
wind in the leaves. They shut their eyes, and then it seemed that they could almost hear words, cool
Mm-hmm.
words, saying
Mm-hmm.
something about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell. I know we've talked about this, that there's um, that every spell is some kind of word, and that words themselves are spells. It says that Merry and Pippin dragged themselves forward and lay down with their backs to the willow trunk.
Yeah, they could almost hear words, cool words, saying something.
Yeah, about water and sleep. They gave themselves up to the spell. And so it's the words, right? The spell is not just in the air. The spell is like a word. And then you know, we get Sam saying, I hear it singing about sleep now. And so there's something about that language that
No, yeah, and you're right. That is something that we've talked about. And I think it'll come up with Tom Bombadil, who like kind of famously sings
mhm.
in a minute. But we tend to think of magic probably because of Harry Potter or like things like Harry Potter.
Mhm.
We think of a spell being like a string of magic words. Say like, what's the magic word?
Mhm.
Last week we talked about presto changeo,
Mhm.
or things that are like a set of words, a predetermined set of words that, if said in the right way by a person with magic powers, that a magic like event happens,
Mhm.
right? Um, but the word spell just means word,
Mhm.
or news.
Yeah.
So like the word gospel, is a English translation of a Greek word meaning good news, euangelion, right?
Yeah.
And so it's good news, good word, God spell,
Mhm.
good spell. So a spell is just a word. And so there's a sense in Tolkien that like magic is, I think you and I have called it like the power of command,
Yeah.
where
Right.
if you tell or ask someone to do something, be it a person or a tree or a flame, if you ask it to do something or you tell it to do something, it does it, even if it wouldn't normally do so. So you
Yeah.
you are a magical person like Elrond or Gandalf, and so you say to the river, you know, swell up and look like horses and take out these Nazgul, and it does it.
Yeah.
Or you're Gandalf and you really desperately need a fire, and so you use a word of command,
Right.
and the firewood erupts into flames.
Right.
Or you're a tree who really wants to eat some hobbits, and so you tell them to fall asleep and they fall asleep.
Right.
um in Tolkien, music is like a magical thing.
Right.
And in Tolkien's legendarium, in the Silmarillion, the very first words in the Silmarillion are about creation being sung into existence by the powers, right?
Mhm.
So this has echoes of that, where it's like you see the tree is like singing the hobbits into a state of compliance.
Mhm.
It commands them to sleep, and they are compelled to sleep because he has that that power of command. Um, which we'll see in a second. What makes Bombadil special is that his power of command is more irresistible than the Willow Man, who we'll get to know this tree as.
Right. He has there's something to do with authority or something like that. Like,
Yeah, he has a greater authority than the Willow because he's called the Master.
yeah. And Frodo, he's got some willpower. He is fighting sleep, but it says even as he kind of tries to move around and keep himself awake, he's half in a dream. He straddles one of the roots in the stream, which is like a gnarled dragonet straining down to drink, and paddles his feet, but he ends up too sleepy to fight and gets dragged into the water. Sam, of course, is the only one awake and pulls him out of the water by the jacket and drags him from under the root. Yeah, so the tree is trying to drown him. And Frodo immediately says, "Do you know, Sam? The beastly tree threw me in. I felt it. The big root just twisted round and tipped me in." "You were dreaming, I expect, Mr. Frodo." Sam is like, even though he's like, "I don't trust this tree," he's also like, you probably dreamed that.
It's
And
like, yeah, I know I just heard this tree singing.
right, exactly. But I'm gonna snap back to my sort of nature as this practical person. And I love this line that Frodo says, "What about the others? I wonder what sort of dreams they are having."
Mm.
Um, and we find out that the dreams are not too good. Pippin is totally gone, and Mary's about halfway in the trunk.
Just like in the jaws of this hoary, uh, gnarled, personified willow tree. Um, yeah, it's interesting. Like, uh, you know, Sam is like, trees don't throw hobbits into rivers. Like, you
Mm-hmm.
must have been dreaming. But pretty quickly he realizes, like, oh no, like actually this tree is like straight up trying to eat Merry and Pippin. And so they start like just, kicking the tree with their feet. And it's like not even caring that they're just like bruising their feet. They're kicking it as hard as they can with no use. Sam says, we didn't happen to bring an axe, did we? And Frodo's like, well, I got like a little hatchet for firewood. And Sam's like, that's it. So he starts a fire,
Yeah.
which immediately they regret because Merry and Pippin scream like, put the fire out.
Put it out. Put it out.
They're going to crush us. Like,
and we have the whole time this is happening, we get these like tremors and shivers and things that go through the tree. The leaves are sort of dry or something, and they have this like shivery thing that happens, and it says that when the fire does lick against the dry scoured rind of the ancient tree and scorches it, a tremor ran through the whole willow. Yeah. The leaves seemed to hiss above their heads with the sound of pain and anger. A loud scream came from Merry. So there's like so much sound and activity happening. And then from far inside the tree, they heard Pippin give a muffled yell. Put it out, cried Merry. He'll squeeze me in two.
Who? What?
Like,
they still don't get it. They're like
what
are you talking about? The tree that's eating me.
The tree, you fool.
For the love of God, put it out.
And then the willow, the branches begin to sway violently. And there's a sound of a wind rising and spreading outwards to the branches of all the other trees round about, as though they had dropped a stone into the quiet slumber of the river valley and set up ripples of anger that ran out through the whole forest. Like this, it's like a system, you know.
That's terrifying.
It's like all the trees are part of some kind of like network, which now we know like forests literally are part of like a mycelium network that they can like communicate with each other and stuff.
Yeah.
Tolkien didn't know that scientifically, but like there's like this is, I think
he knew it spiritually.
He knew it spiritually, and I think through whatever fairy tales or whatever. Like there's like some knowledge, like deep
inherited wisdom,
knowledge of inherited wisdom about the way that forests work. Pretty fascinating.
You know, I actually just recently read The Hidden Life of Trees.
Yeah, it's a cool book.
Which is a really cool, great book. But when he's talking about the mycelium network of fungus between tree roots and how they communicate using electrical signals across,
it's like a brain.
This network. He mentions that he calls it like Tolkien-esque. He's like, you know, this is like he kind of intones Tolkien here, and I think Tolkien just kind of intuitively understood that about trees, that they had wisdom and agency that we couldn't understand. It's because we move around so quickly and they move so slowly.
Right.
We can trick ourselves into thinking that they're statues, but they're not. You know, they're living, breathing things with a will of their own. But yeah, then Frodo hits full panic.
Yeah.
And you know, I think all of us have also all felt this. I mean, this keeps bringing me back to childhood, but I think we've all had moments where we were just like, oh, this thing has completely spun out of my control.
Yeah.
And so whether you're praying to God or to the universe or whatever, you know, you just go back into that almost like childhood state of just like, help me.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, I can't help myself right now. I need someone else to help me. And it says that he kind of runs out and starts screaming, help, 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 not knowing who he's screaming to. But he gets an answer, and that answer comes in the form of this mysterious creature, Tom Bombadil. All right. So this might get us like kicked out of Tolkien world for even asking this question. Do we like Tom Bombadil?
Oh, I like well, I can only answer for myself. I like aspects of it. I think that I like a big mystery, you know?
Yeah.
And I like how, and we'll talk more about this next time or even over the next couple chapters, but I like how unconcerned he is, unaffected he is by the ring, by events, by
Yeah.
the sort of vagaries of whatever day-to-day thing is happening.
Because he's so ancient.
Yeah, he's so ancient, and there's like some kind of power that he either represents or incarnates or something. There's like there's something flowing through him that's like so much more fundamental to whatever the nature of existence, that he's just unworried about things. And I love that aspect of him. And
Right.
he is extremely annoying, I think. Just extremely annoying. His songs are strange. The way he talks, I think, is annoying. And maybe you want to talk about that, the way he talks. And I'll let you get there. But
Yeah.
my buddy Harlan, we were talking about this, and they said, I think Tolkien didn't know what he was writing. I think this was early, and he just put it in there, and
because he liked it.
Because he liked it. And he was thinking about his kids, and he was trying to do something kind of like silly, and
yes.
And then but like the arc from the story goes from here to like the fires of, Mount Doom. And you're like, these are not the same. Like, and so I think that he just didn't know exactly what he was up to at this point.
No, he was still searching for the story.
Yeah, he never took it out because he liked it. And maybe Tom Bombadil is a little bit of him in the story, like some like ideal for himself or something like that. Anyway, I find him extremely annoying, but I can't help but like him. That's my...
Yeah, I mean, as a kid, I would skip this chapter.
Yeah. Yeah, I would
skip. Yeah. I would skip from probably like maybe even like the first 5 or 6 times that I read Lord of the Rings. I would skip straight from them setting out and saying goodbye to Fatty and pick up at the Prancing Pony. Yeah. And that's kind of famously like what Peter Jackson does as well.
Peter Jackson does, exactly. Yeah.
But I think it's interesting because, okay, here's a few things about, I think if Tolkien were writing this book today, there is no way that this chapter makes it into the final edited version of the book.
No.
Like, Bombadil is cut, all right? But here, let's just talk about what we know about Tom Bombadil and maybe like what he represents in the story.
Okay.
So here's what we do know, okay? He's magical AF.
Yeah, big time.
He is the oldest living thing in the world. Yeah. He was the first thing. He's been there since before the first acorn. He saw the elves arrive. He saw the elves leave. He saw the elves come back. He saw the first Dark Lord come. Mm-hmm. He saw him fall. He saw the next Dark Lord come. He saw wizards. He saw all manner of things come through. He has seen it all. He's smaller than a man, but he's bigger than a hobbit.
Strange. So he's not exactly a human being.
He's not a human being.
He's his own thing.
He's his own thing. He sings what the Hobbit says is seemingly nonsense. So all the ring dong dilios that we get, either it's nonsense or it's just a language that the Hobbits don't understand, but is clearly lyrical.
Yeah, I never.
And so the Hobbits are kind of representing it as nonsense words, and then we get it as kind of nonsense words in English. But I think it's probably the case that these are words in a language that we no longer understand.
Right.
In the same way that if we were to hear an archaic language, it would sound like nonsense to us, but it would have kind of a symmetry to it.
You can tell it's a language that is carrying meaning. You just don't know what it is. Yeah.
Right. And so the fact that it's still lyrical in a meter,
right,
and that it rhymes, show that there's a symmetry to it, that even though we don't understand what he's saying, it's clearly the case. But like, so he speaks in a certain rhythm. I'm going to look it up so that I don't say it wrong. I don't think either of us are experts on poetry.
No.
I
mean, I think I'm an expert in everything I talk about, but that's a personality problem.
That's a personality problem.
Not a description of reality.
Not a trait. So he speaks in a trochaic meter,
Trochaic, yeah.
which means that the foot of each phrase, so like the ending of each phrase, has a stressed syllable followed by an unstressed syllable.
Right.
If you ask me to write in that style, I couldn't.
No.
But like when you hear Tom sing, it follows this meter. But also when he speaks, it follows this meter.
Everything he says. It is very worth going and listening to the Andy Serkis recorded Lord of the Rings, because he does it perfectly. You can hear it really well, and he does it. It gets. This is what I mean. I just can't.
It's taxing.
It's taxing.
It's taxing.
It's taxing, but it's beautiful how Andy Serkis just sells out. I mean, it's like he really does it with every line, and it's helpful to get it, I think, in your ear if you're having a hard time.
Hey, Tom Bombadil, Tom Bombadillo. Like
Yeah,
he
exactly.
He really goes for it.
He goes for it 100%. It's great.
But this style, this trochaic meter. So Tolkien loved the Finnish myths, which were collected in like the mid 19th century in a volume called the Kalevala, which Tolkien would have had access to as a child. And part of the reason why he loved languages so much was because he learned the Finnish language when he was young. And so a lot of Tolkien's languages are at least like in the neighborhood of Finnish.
Yeah.
He loved the lyricism of Finnish. He loved the way that it sounds when it was spoken aloud. And I think it, like, when you read Tolkien's prose, it was written to be heard.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
Like there's a lyricism to what Tolkien, like his own writing style, that is missed when you're just reading it with your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas if you hear it read aloud, the lyricism of it really jumps off the page.
Yeah.
But the trochaic meter is the meter of the Kalevala, which is the Finnish epic poem. And in the Kalevala, the characters, the heroic characters, all do battle with each other through singing.
Interesting.
So the world is essentially formed through the good and the bad characters singing at each other.
Yeah.
And the singing like forms the world, which has obvious parallels in the Silmarillion, which hopefully we'll get to, like in 40 years or whatever, however long it takes us to get through Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Eventually we'll read the Silmarillion together too. But so I think, like, if we're just talking about what we know about Tom Bombadil, he is a powerful spiritual being who is incarnated. So he has a physical body.
Yeah.
He seems to have chosen to come to Middle Earth at like the beginning of time.
Yeah.
He was one of the angelic spiritual beings, kind of like in the same like punching class as Gandalf, even though it's never explicitly said. I think that the implication is that because of the fact that he sings this way and the fact that he has like the power of command, I think that he is probably an Ainur who was present at the beginning of time and helped like sing creation into being.
Yeah.
So Frodo panics. He runs out. He says, "Help, help, help." He doesn't know like who he's asking for to come help, but he's in this like sense of desperation, and his prayer is answered by the weirdest character in Lord of the Rings. And we realize now that we are not going to be able to like sufficiently get into Tom Bombadil in this episode.
Yeah.
So next episode, we'll be looking at chapter 7, In the House of Tom Bombadil. And before we get into like what happens in that chapter, we're going to talk a little bit about who Bombadil is and why in the world he is in this book. Yeah. Does that sound good, Logan?
That's perfect. I love it.
Okay, so next week is all Bombadil all the time, and we'll figure out who this little weirdo is.
Hey doll, Mary doll. You know?
Hey doll, Mary doll, ding dong.
I mean, doesn't that say it all? Thanks for reading along with us. As we just said, please join us next week for all Bombadil all the time. It's going to be book 1, chapter 7 of Fellowship in the house of Tom Bombadil, and of course, the end of chapter 6. If you want to help us out, please share the podcast with a Lord of the Rings fan in your life. Follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube, and visit waywardwizards.com for more info. Ring a dong, hop along, fall all the willow. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next week.
Ring a dong, hop along, follow on Spotify.
Amen. See you next week.